There's a man in the lake. He's being attacked.
Sir, can you tell me what's happening?
It's an alligator, a huge one. You're screaming. Now there's flashing. And please.
Sir, are you there? We have units on the way. Just stay on the line and describe everything you're seeing.
We all believe in our own invincibility. It's a quiet, comforting lie we tell ourselves every day. We're in control. The world, with all its chaotic, brutal beauty, is something we can manage, something we can understand. We build fences, we post signs, we draw lines in the sand. But what happens when the wilderness decides to ignore those lines? What happens when a predator, an ancient armored echo from a forgotten age, decides that its world and your world are one and the same? This is a story about that terrifying collision, about a man named Paul Atkinson, a loving father and husband, who lived in a place where the sun always shone and the water sparkled like a promise, a place where the biggest danger seemed to be a sunburn. Paul, like so many of us, had a passion, a hobby that brought him joy and a sense of escape, a hobby that, in the end, led him to a serene, beautiful lake and into the path of something unspeakably old and hungry. He wasn't just killed, he was eaten alive. And his final moments, a blur of thrashing water and primal fear, reveal a truth we all hope we never have to face, that the wilderness can and will swallow you whole. Paul Atkinson was the kind of man you'd want as your neighbor, the kind of guy who'd lend you a tool, help you jumpstart your car, and always have a quick joke ready. At 47, he was living the quintessential Florida dream. He and his wife, Sarah, had moved to the Tampa area a few years back, trading the cold winters of the North for year-round sunshine. They had 2 kids, a little girl named Lily, who was obsessed with princesses, and a son, Noah, who was just starting to get into baseball. Paul worked as a landscape designer, a job he loved because it let him be outside, sculpting the world into something beautiful and manicured. He spent his days in the green, humid air, taming nature for other people. But his real passion, the thing that brought him pure, unadulterated joy, was disc golf. For the uninitiated, it's like regular golf, but with a frisbee. The courses are often set in sprawling public parks, weaving through wooded areas, across fields, and in this case, around the edges of a large, murky lake. It was a meditative sport for Paul. He loved the quiet focus it required, the satisfying thwack of the disc hitting the chains, and the camaraderie with his friends. It was a simple pleasure, an escape from the daily grind. His local course was in John S. Taylor Park in Largo, a popular spot with a well-maintained disc golf layout. The course snaked right alongside the shoreline of a tranquil body of water known as Taylor Lake. For years, this was his sanctuary. He knew every turn of the path, every tricky shot, every tree that could snag a disc. He had lost count of the number of times he had seen a wayward disc splash down into the placid water. But Paul, ever the pragmatist, had a system. He'd never go in. He'd just move on, and maybe if he saw it later on a low-water day, he'd snag it with a long grabber tool. This was a routine, a ritual. It was a perfect, peaceful life. But in Florida, perfection is always a fragile thing. A thin veneer over a wild, untamed heart. A heart that beats in the murky depths of every lake and pond. A heart that has existed for millions of years, indifferent to the lives of the people who build their homes on its shores. And for Paul Atkinson, that quiet, unseen heart was about to wake up. The American alligator is a true living fossil. They are descendants of a lineage that has been around for over 200 million years, predating the dinosaurs. They are perfectly evolved, apex predators. In Florida, they are everywhere. They are a part of the landscape, an unspoken presence in every canal, pond, and lake. The one that lived in Taylor Lake was an old male. He was big. We're not talking about a little 5-footer you see lounging on a golf course. This was a monster. An estimated 12 feet long, weighing over 500 pounds. A dark, scaly torpedo of pure muscle and instinct. He wasn't a pet or a novelty. He was a wild animal, a hunter. Alligators are notoriously territorial, and this one had claimed Taylor Lake as his domain. For years he'd lived there, mostly unseen, a silent shadow beneath the lily pads. They are ambush predators, built for explosions of speed and power. They lie in wait, sometimes for hours, with only their eyes and nostrils above the water. They are patient. There were signs. Of course there were signs. The park had no swimming notices posted everywhere, a standard warning for any body of water in Florida. But beyond that, there were whispers among the locals. Stories of an unusually large gator, a nuisance gator as the trappers would call it, that seemed to be growing bolder. A missing dog here, a startled fisherman there. Paul and his friends would occasionally see the telltale wake of something large moving through the water, or spot a pair of cold, dead eyes peeking out from the surface. They'd say, "Wow, that's a big one," and then go back to their game. They were treating it like a statue, a part of the scenery, not a threat. And that, in a state where these prehistoric beasts are everywhere, is the most dangerous assumption you can ever make. The warnings were there, but they were subtle. Like a faint drumbeat you hear from miles away, growing louder with each passing day. The alligator, which had long been a shy, reclusive resident of the lake, was changing its behavior. It was being seen more and more frequently, often in the daylight hours. It would float closer to the shore, its massive form an unmistakable, unsettling presence. One day, a few weeks before the attack, Paul's disc golf partner, a guy named Mark, had a close call. He had overshot a difficult hole, and his disc landed just at the water's edge. As he reached to grab it, a sudden movement in the water caught his eye. A ripple, a dark shape. The alligator was less than 10 feet away, its head just below the surface, watching him. Mark froze. He said it felt like 100 years. He slowly, carefully pulled his hand back. He left the disc. He never spoke of it again until after. The fear was too real, too raw. Then there was the incident with the stray cat. A family was having a picnic by the lakeside, and their cat, a fluffy orange tabby, wandered off toward the water. It was an instant. One moment the cat was there, sniffing at the reeds. The next, a great spray of water, a frantic shriek, and nothing. No one saw the gator, only the aftermath, the terror. The park rangers were notified, but no action was taken. This was, after all, Florida. It was just nature. Paul, like everyone else, heard these stories. He dismissed them. He believed the gator was just doing what gators do. It wasn't a monster. It was a reptile. As long as you kept your distance, you were safe. Paul was a creature of habit. He had his routine, his course, his system. He had lost discs before, and he knew they were just things, replaceable. He'd learned to let them go, but on this specific day, for some reason, the rules would change. The small, quiet acts of defiance against his own common sense would finally catch up to him. The slow, patient buildup of ignored warnings was about to culminate in a horrifying, explosive moment of truth. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun was already high in the sky, a searing, bright orb over the Florida landscape. Paul had the day off. He and Sarah had a small argument about some bills the night before. Nothing major, but it had left him feeling a little out of sorts. He needed his escape. He needed the quiet focus of the disc golf course. He kissed Sarah and the kids goodbye, grabbed his favorite discs, and headed out. The park was mostly empty, which he preferred. Just a few dog walkers and some early morning joggers. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of pine and lake water. He made his way through the front nine, feeling the familiar rhythm of the game settle his mind. He was on the back nine, near the 10th hole, when he made a rookie mistake. A powerful forehand throw went wild, slicing left, and his prized yellow disc, a limited edition he had bought on a trip, soared over the reeds and into the middle of the lake. It made a small, pathetic plop as it landed. Paul stood there for a moment, a wave of frustration washing over him. This wasn't just a disc. This was his disc. The sun glinted off the yellow plastic, a beacon of frustration. He knew the rule. Leave it. But this time, something was different. A stubbornness he didn't usually have bubbled up. He looked around. No one was near. The water looked calm, still. He told himself it was just a few feet in, easy to grab. He walked to the edge, a thicket of sawgrass and low-hanging branches. He saw a long, heavy stick, and a flash of inspiration hit him. He could use it to pull the disc closer. He waded in, the water surprisingly warm against his shins. It came up to his knees, then his thighs. The lake bed was a soft, squishy muck. The stick was longer than he thought, and he started to push it toward the floating disc. He was so focused on the yellow plastic, so intent on recovering his small piece of frustration, that he missed the telltale ripple. The water was not still. A subtle, dark wake was moving toward him, not from the open water, but from the shadow of the overhanging trees to his right. He was too deep in his own world, too lost in the simple, mundane task of retrieving a lost toy. He was just a few feet from the disc when it happened. The attack was not a cinematic leap from the water. It was a silent, terrifying eruption from below. A dark shape, a blur of scaled hide and primordial power, slammed into his legs. The force was unimaginable, a freight train hitting him in the shallow water. He was knocked clean off his feet, the stick flying from his hands. He barely had time to register the pain, the tearing sensation in his flesh before he was being dragged. The water, once a serene mirror, exploded into a churning, violent vortex of splashing and foam. He screamed, a sound not of anger, but of pure instinctual terror. He thrashed, trying to find a footing, to push back against the unseen force. The alligator had his leg in its jaws, a crushing grip that felt like bone-shattering stone. Its skin was like sandpaper, its teeth a dozen razor-sharp daggers. He was pulled under. The world went from bright, sunlit blue to dark, murky green. He was underwater for what felt like an eternity, the pressure building in his ears, his lungs screaming for air. He was a doll, a rag, being shaken and pulled by a force he couldn't comprehend. He fought with every fiber of his being, a primal, desperate struggle for life. He punched, kicked, and clawed at the scaly hide, but it was like hitting a wall of solid rock. The gator, with a flick of its massive head, did what alligators do. The death roll. He was spun, a dizzying, violent spiral that disoriented him completely. When he finally broke the surface, gasping for air, he saw a fisherman on the opposite bank, his mouth open in a silent scream. Paul tried to yell for help, but the gator's jaws tightened, crushing the remaining hope out of him. He was pulled under again, this time for good. The last sound anyone heard from him was a gurgling, frantic gasp for air. Then there was only the sound of the water. Churning, splashing, then slowly silence. The 911 call came in at 9:34 a.m. The caller, a man named Robert Jenkins, was a birdwatcher who had been standing on the opposite bank of the lake. He had seen the entire horrifying sequence unfold through his binoculars. His trembling hands made it difficult to hold the phone steady, but his description was chillingly clear. He had seen a man go into the water. He had seen the gator. He had seen the thrashing. He had seen the man go under and not come back up. The first responders arrived within minutes, 2 Largo police cruisers and a fire engine. The scene was eerily quiet. The lake was once again still, a perfect sheet of reflective glass under the morning sun. The officers, trained for every kind of emergency, felt an immediate primal sense of dread. They walked to the shoreline, following Robert Jenkins's shaky directions. There was no sign of Paul. No body, no struggle, nothing but a small, faded yellow disc floating innocently on the surface. Soon the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, arrived, their truck marked with official decals. They were the experts. They understood the true nature of this kind of horror. They immediately knew what they were dealing with: a fatal, unprovoked attack. The officers and firefighters stood back, their roles now shifted from rescue to recovery. An FWC alligator trapper, a grizzled veteran with a face like worn leather, arrived with a team. They deployed a small boat, its motor a low thrumming sound in the heavy silence. They used sonar, long poles, and even a grappling hook, but they couldn't find him. The trapper, in a grim, detached voice, explained the grim reality to a senior police officer. The gator would have pulled him to a den, or hidden him beneath a submerged log to return to its meal later. The grim search continued for hours. The park was sealed off. A media helicopter buzzed overhead. a constant whirring reminder that this quiet tragedy was now a public spectacle. The FWC team finally located the massive alligator, lurking in the shallows near where Paul had entered the water. It was a silent, unblinking sentinel. They used a large trap, baiting it with carrion. The gator, showing a chilling lack of fear, slid into the cage without a fight. It was hauled onto the bank, its immense body a terrible final monument to the incident. They euthanized it on the spot. It was a necessary evil. Inside the gator's stomach, they found the remains. It was a gruesome, gut-wrenching confirmation of the 911 caller's worst fears. The news of the attack spread like wildfire. A grim headline splashed across every news outlet in the state, and then the nation. Florida man eaten by alligator in disc golf park. The name Paul Atkinson was no longer a private, cherished thing. It was a public tragedy, a cautionary tale. Sarah and the children were immediately surrounded by family and friends, but the horror of it was inescapable. The media descended upon their neighborhood, a pack of vultures looking for a soundbite, a tearful interview. The park, once a place of recreation and peace, was now a crime scene, a morbid tourist attraction. The autopsy on the alligator was performed by FWC biologists and the medical examiner. The results were sickening. Not only did they find Paul's remains, but they also discovered the bones of multiple animals, including a dog and a raccoon, a grim testament to the gator's predatory efficiency. The report, clinical and detached, confirmed that Paul had been killed by the initial crushing bite and subsequent drowning. The partial consumption was a final, horrifying detail that seared itself into the public's consciousness. The public reaction was a mix of grief, outrage, and, as is common in Florida, a resigned shrug. Some expressed sympathy for Paul and his family, while others blamed him for his carelessness. "You don't go into a gator lake," they'd say, a phrase as common in Florida as "it's hot." There was a small but vocal group that protested the killing of the alligator, arguing that it was just a wild animal acting on instinct. They held signs that read, "He was in its home." The city of Largo, in an attempt to show they were taking the incident seriously, closed the park for an indefinite period. They removed the disc golf course and erected new, more prominent signs with bolder, more graphic warnings about the dangers of alligators. A small memorial was created near the spot where Paul had entered the water, a simple wooden cross and a few wilting bouquets. It was a quiet place of mourning, but it couldn't erase the memory of the violence that had taken place there. The legal fallout was minimal. There was no one to sue, no one to hold accountable. The official report declared it a tragic accident, a collision between human and nature that could not have been prevented by any reasonable measures. The family was left to pick up the pieces, to try and explain to two small children why their father, the man who had always made them feel safe, was gone forever. And the park, once a symbol of the Florida lifestyle, became a monument to a brutal, primal reality that many had forgotten, or simply chosen to ignore. Paul Atkinson's story is a stark reminder. It's not a story about an evil monster or a careless fool. It's a story about the fragility of our dominion. We build our homes and our parks and our lives on the edges of a world that is wilder and more ancient than we can possibly imagine. We think we have it all figured out, that we have bent the planet to our will. But the truth is, we are always just guests here. The silent, unblinking eyes of a predator are watching us, waiting. We can ignore the warnings. We can dismiss the subtle shifts in behavior. We can pretend that the world we have created is the only world that exists. But when we step into that murky water, when we cross that unseen line, we are no longer in our world. We are in theirs. And in their world, there is no mercy. There is only hunger. And the next time you're near a quiet pond or a still lake, you might see the ripple. You might see a dark shape slide silently beneath the surface. And you will know, in that moment, that you are not alone. You are in the presence of something that has always been here, and will always be here, long after you are gone. And it is watching. It is always, always watching.